Welcome back to the Deep Dive for another
Yes.
journey into occult archives. You know we love to uncover the mysteries and myths behind history's most feared books.
Yeah, some of them are pretty intense.
They really are, and tonight we are embarking on a quest into the ancient world with episode 257, Pythagoras and the Delphic Mysteries, the hidden teachings of sacred geometry, forbidden initiation, and the lost science of the soul.
That's a mouthful.
It is, and it's a lot to unpack. But
Yeah.
luckily, we have someone here who is much more well-versed in this than I am.
I've been looking forward to this one.
Me too. We're going to be talking about Pythagoras and his intriguing connection to the Delphic Mysteries,
Right.
drawing from some pretty cool ancient accounts, like Édouard Schuré's work.
Great source.
And so we're going to kind of go on a journey together through some profound ideas that still resonate today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's so fascinating about Pythagoras is how, although he lived thousands of years ago, his influence is still felt so strongly today
Yeah.
in mathematics and philosophy and music.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, his ideas are still
So foundational.
really foundational. And, when you start to examine the context of his life
Right.
and all the incredible experiences he had,
Yeah.
you can really begin to understand just how deep his wisdom ran.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning, right? We're in the 6th century BCE on the island of Samos,
Okay.
which is a bustling Ionian island.
Mm.
And Schuré really paints this vivid picture of Samos as this major port, a hub of culture,
Cosmopolitan.
but also under the rule of this tyrant, Polycrates.
Yeah, not exactly a benevolent leader.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because you've got this sort of flourishing of the arts,
Yeah.
Poets like Anacreon we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you have this lack of freedom.
Right.
And it seems like there was maybe a little bit too much emphasis on
Earthly pleasures.
earthly pleasures.
Yeah, there was definitely an element of hedonism in the air.
Yeah, it's not quite the image that pops into your head when you think about, the birthplace of some profound philosophical
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily think
Go on.
that.
movement.
Right. But it's important to remember that this was a time of great change and upheaval in the ancient world,
Okay.
and Samos was right in the thick of it.
Okay.
And despite Polycrates' support for the arts, as you mentioned, his autocratic rule really did stifle intellectual and political liberty.
It's interesting, right? Because Pythagoras didn't seem to be drawn to all that hedonism that was happening,
No, not at all.
at least according to Schuré.
Right. From a young age, he sought out knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah.
He studied with Hermodamus right there in Samos,
Mhm.
and then he traveled to Syros to learn from Pharisaids.
Wow.
And he even engaged with the thinkers of the Milesian school,
Oh, wow.
like Thales and Anaximander.
So he's like going to the top, thinkers of his time.
Absolutely, he was on a quest for knowledge from the very beginning.
That's so cool. It's almost like, how people today will go and apprentice under, someone they admire. It's almost
Exactly.
like that's what he was doing.
Yeah, it was a very similar process.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it seems like he was getting a lot out of that, but at the same time, he wasn't fully satisfied.
Yeah, all these great thinkers, they had their own theories about the nature of reality.
Right.
Thales thought it was water. Anaximander thought it was this boundless primordial substance.
Yeah.
But Pythagoras was looking for something more fundamental, a unifying principle that connected everything.
He wanted to understand like the big picture.
Exactly. He wanted to find the secret of the cosmos.
That's so cool. It's like he could already intuit that everything was connected.
Yes, and that's really the key insight here.
Yeah.
This idea that everything in the universe is interconnected and that there must be some kind of underlying harmony or balance.
Like the force.
Kind of, yeah.
It's like the force or something.
It's this idea of a universal force or principle that governs everything.
And this wasn't just some abstract theoretical idea for him, right? I mean,
Yeah.
This was something that he really felt deeply.
Oh, absolutely. And, Schuré talks about the profound influence of his mother Parthenis
Right.
and this amazing prophecy that surrounded his birth.
Right.
Apparently a hierophant from Lebanon.
A hierophant, that's like a high priest, right?
Yeah, a high priest, basically.
Okay.
He told Pythagoras' mother that her son would achieve great wisdom,
Wow.
but that the deepest knowledge of God was no longer to be found in Greece. It was in Egypt.
Oh, wow. So he was kind of destined to go to Egypt.
It seems that way, right?
That's so cool.
And so, armed with a letter of introduction from Polycrates himself,
Oh, wow.
Pythagoras sets off on this incredible journey to Egypt.
It's interesting, though, because when he gets to Egypt, he's not exactly welcomed with open arms.
No, the Egyptian priests were very wary of foreigners, especially Greeks.
They were kind of seen as superficial, right?
Yeah, they were seen as a bit too concerned with the material world
Oh.
and not serious enough about spiritual matters.
But Pythagoras was determined to learn from them,
Oh, absolutely.
and he knew that he would have to prove himself.
Exactly. He understood that accessing their wisdom would require incredible discipline and self-mastery.
And so it took him a while, but he eventually won them over.
It did, and, according to Schuré, he spent an incredible 22 years in Egypt.
22 years.
Yeah, 22 years undergoing initiation under the high priest Sanchis in Memphis.
So he was basically embedded in this ancient tradition for over 2 decades.
Exactly. He was completely immersed in their teachings and practices.
That's amazing.
And during this time, he underwent rigorous trials. He faced all sorts of temptations.
Like what kind of temptation?
Well, temptations of the flesh, temptations of power, temptations of pride, all the things that can lead a person astray from the spiritual path.
Almost like a hero's journey or something.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, ultimately he achieved a profound spiritual awakening.
Wow.
And he came to understand the doctrine of the Logos light.
Okay, so what is the Logos light?
Well, it's this concept of a universal divine reason or word that permeates all of creation.
Okay.
It's kind of like the underlying intelligence of the universe.
Oh, wow.
And he also learned about the concept of human evolution through cycles.
What does that mean?
It's the idea that souls are reborn again and again.
Reincarnation.
Yeah, reincarnation.
Okay.
And that through each lifetime, they gradually evolve towards greater spiritual perfection.
Wow, that's a really deep concept.
It is, and, it's a concept that's found in many different spiritual traditions.
And this wasn't just about philosophical contemplation, right?
No, Pythagoras also mastered sacred mathematics.
Okay, what's that?
Well, it's the understanding of numbers, not just as quantities, but as principles that underlie reality.
So they're not just thinking 1 + 1 = 2.
No, they're thinking about the deeper meaning of numbers.
Okay.
Their symbolic significance, their relationships to each other,
Okay.
and how they reflect the divine order of the cosmos.
Wow.
The Egyptian priests taught him that the science of numbers and the art of willpower are the 2 keys of magic. They open up all the gates of the universe.
That's so cool. They sound like some powerful tools.
They are, and, this emphasis on the power of the will is something that really sets Pythagoras apart.
Okay.
He believed that through training and discipline, the human will could achieve incredible things.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a very empowering idea.
It is.
And so after this incredible immersion in Egyptian wisdom,
Yeah.
Pythagoras was forced to leave Egypt when the Persian king Cambyses invaded,
Oh, wow.
and he was taken as a captive to Babylon along with a group of Egyptian priests.
So now we're in Babylon.
We are, and Babylon at this time was a truly remarkable place.
What was so special about Babylon?
Well, it was this incredible melting pot of cultures and religions.
Yes.
You had the ancient Chaldean priesthood,
Okay.
the Persian magi, and even the elite of the Jewish captives.
Wow, so many different traditions all coming together.
Exactly. And it's fascinating to think about the potential for exchange and synthesis of esoteric knowledge in this kind of environment.
Yes, like a hub for spiritual ideas.
It really is. And, Schuré even suggests that there might have been some kind of underlying esoteric agreement between these different priestly traditions.
Like they had a secret understanding or something.
Yeah, something like that.
That's so cool.
And, in Babylon, Pythagoras had the opportunity to delve into the knowledge of the Magi, particularly their understanding of what they called pentamorphic fire.
Pentamorphic fire. What is that?
Well, it sounds a lot like electricity to me.
Oh.
And they also had this concept of astral light,
Astral light.
which is the subtle energy that pervades the universe, and they used ancient languages in their magical practices.
So they believed that words had power.
Exactly. They said, "Make no change in the barbarous names employed in evocation, for they are the pantheistic names of God. They are magnetized with the worship of multitudes, and their power is ineffable."
So they were basically tapping into the collective spiritual energy of these ancient words.
Yes, they believed that these words had been charged with power through centuries of use in sacred rituals.
Wow. So after all these incredible experiences in Egypt and Babylon, Pythagoras finally returns to Samos.
He does after 34 years.
34 years. Wow.
Yeah.
He must have been a changed man.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Schuré says that his knowledge far surpassed that of his Greek contemporaries.
Wow.
He had this deep understanding of the underlying unity of different religious traditions,
Okay.
and he was filled with a sense of mission. He wanted to share his wisdom and help revitalize Greece.
I like that. So that brings us to the second part of our exploration, which is the Delphic Mysteries.
Right. Oh.
Schuré describes Delphi as the most sacred site in all of Greece.
Yeah, it was the home of the famous oracle.
Right, the Oracle of Delphi.
The Pythagoras.
Right, the Pythagoras. Wow, so this was a place of huge spiritual significance.
It was, and it was also politically significant because it was the site of the Amphictyonic assemblies.
Okay, so what were those?
Well, they were kind of like ancient Greek councils where representatives from different city-states would gather to discuss religious and political matters.
Oh, wow. So it's like a center for both spiritual and worldly affairs.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
And Schuré highlights a few reasons why Delphi was so important.
Okay.
It had the central location in Greece.
All right.
It was naturally defensible.
Okay.
And it was also the site of a unique geological phenomenon.
Really?
Yeah, apparently there was a cavern there that emitted these vapors that were believed to induce inspiration and ecstatic states.
Like a natural hallucinogen or something?
Kind of, yeah.
Wow.
And there's this ancient legend about a shepherd who first began prophesying in this altered state.
Oh, wow. So that's how the whole oracle thing started.
That's the story, anyhow.
It's so cool. It's like the place itself is imbued with this mystical energy.
Yeah, it's a very powerful place.
And it's interesting that Delphi wasn't always associated with Apollo.
Right.
It was originally consecrated to other deities like Earth Themis and Phoebe.
Yeah, it seems like there's a whole succession of deities who were worshipped there before Apollo came along.
Okay.
And, Themis was the goddess of divine law and justice.
Oh, okay. And Phoebe was associated with the moon.
Interesting.
So it's like there was this layering of different spiritual energies at Delphi.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then, of course, you have the famous myth of Jupiter's eagles
Okay.
meeting at Delphi to mark it as the center of the Earth.
The Omphalos.
Exactly.
Okay.
But this really solidified Apollo's authority at Delphi.
Okay.
But as Schuré points out, there must have been deeper reasons for Delphi's prestige and influence.
Yeah, what was so special about this place that drew people from all over Greece?
That's the big question, right?
And that brings us to the Orphic understanding of Dionysus and Apollo.
Okay.
Because in the Orphic tradition, they weren't seen as separate competing deities.
Right.
They were actually complementary aspects of the same divine reality.
Yeah, Dionysus represented the esoteric truth,
Okay.
the hidden mysteries that were revealed through initiation,
Okay.
while Apollo represented the application of that truth to the earthly realm.
Okay, so Dionysus is like the inner truth.
And Apollo is like that truth made manifest in the world.
Exact.
I like that it's a cool duality.
It is. And, Schuré identifies Apollo as the solar logos.
The logos.
Yeah, the universal word or divine intelligence.
Okay.
And he draws parallels with figures like Vishnu Mithras and Horus.
Oh, wow. So it's this idea of a universal principle that manifests in different cultures.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
And, even Aeschylus describes Apollo with these white-winged serpents.
White-winged serpents.
Yeah, it's this really evocative imagery that really captures Apollo's multifaceted nature.
And so Apollo's arrival at Delphi is full of symbolic meaning.
Right. He was born on the sacred island of Delos.
Okay.
And then he journeyed to Delphi where he slew the serpent Python.
Wow.
Which Schuré interprets as symbolizing the initiate's triumph over the cycle of life and death and evil.
Oh, okay. So it's like overcoming your lower nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Apollo purified himself in the Vale of Tempe. And he became associated with all sorts of human endeavors, like poetry, music medicine, and law.
So he's really like this force for order and enlightenment.
He is.
That's so cool.
And, we shouldn't forget about Apollo's connection to the Hyperboreans.
Hyperboreans.
Yeah, they were this mythical people who lived in a land of perpetual bliss.
Okay.
And their souls were said to be luminous.
Wow.
And Apollo would periodically return to Delphi in a chariot drawn by swans.
That's so cool.
But only initiates could see him.
Oh, wow. So it's like a secret return.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
And, this really emphasizes Apollo's connection to a higher dimension.
Okay.
And the idea that he was bringing celestial wisdom down to humanity.
So it's like a transmission of knowledge from the gods.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
And so, this brings us to a really pivotal figure in the story of the Delphic Mysteries.
Okay.
Theoclia, the inspired Pythoness.
The Pythoness herself.
Yeah.
So she was the one who actually delivered the prophecies.
She was.
Okay, so how did divination actually work at Delphi?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Theoclea's story gives us some clues.
Okay.
Schuré describes her as a young priestess of Apollo from a hereditary priestly family.
So it was like a family tradition.
Yeah, it was passed down from generation to generation.
Wow.
And Theoclea was naturally drawn to the sanctuary at Delphi,
Okay.
but she was also repelled by the more superficial aspects of popular religion.
Like what?
Well, things like animal sacrifices.
Okay.
She felt that there was something deeper and more profound to spirituality.
I can see that.
Yeah, and she was incredibly sensitive to subtle energies,
Okay.
to what Schuré calls mysterious currents and astral influences.
Astral influences, okay.
And she had visions, she heard voices, and she felt ecstatic sensations in the presence of sunlight.
Wow, so she was like a natural mystic.
Yeah, she was.
Okay.
But she was also struggling to understand these experiences.
Right. Because it's one thing to have these visions and hear these voices, but it's another thing to actually know what they mean.
Exactly. She was searching for a deeper understanding.
Okay.
And that's where Pythagoras comes in.
Oh, okay. So this is where their paths finally cross.
Yes.
Oh.
And it's a really significant meeting.
Yeah.
Because Pythagoras had this incredible authority from his initiations in Egypt and Babylon.
Right. He had all this knowledge that no one else in Greece had.
Exactly. And he had this mission to revitalize the true spirit of Apollo in Greece.
Okay, so he was like a reformer.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay.
And so he shared his wisdom with the priests at Delphi.
Wow.
He told them about his experiences in Egypt and Babylon.
That must have been amazing to hear.
Oh, it would have been incredible.
Yeah, to hear about these ancient mysteries firsthand.
Yeah, and he even prophesied about future threats to Greece.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and this really made an impression on Theoclea because it showed her that Pythagoras had this deep understanding of the workings of the universe.
Yeah.
And he also shared some really profound teachings with her.
Like what?
Well, he taught her about the initiate's ability to influence the course of life and death.
Wow.
And he explained the importance of the magic chain of wills in preserving the destiny of nations.
The magic chain of wills.
Yeah, it's this idea that our thoughts and intentions can actually have a real impact on the world around us.
I like that.
And he also gave her this really profound explanation of Apollo.
Okay.
He presented Apollo not just as a solar deity, but as the manifestation of the one supreme God.
Whoa, wow.
With truth as his essence and light as his physical form.
Okay.
And he said that Apollo was inhabited by glorified spirits like heroes and demigods.
Wow, so he was like a vessel for divine power.
Yeah, exactly.
The really cool way of looking at it.
And this teaching had a profound effect on Theoclea.
Okay.
She had this incredible visionary experience,
Right.
and she foresaw future conflicts, the eventual return of Apollo,
Okay.
and her own role as his inspired voice.
Wow, so she was going to be the mouthpiece of the god?
Yeah, she was.
That's crazy.
It is.
And so in a way, Pythagoras kind of passed the torch to her.
He did, in a sense.
Yeah.
He gave her the knowledge and the inspiration she needed to become the true voice of Apollo.
Wow.
And he also gained a clearer understanding of his own destiny through this interaction.
Really?
Yeah,
That's so cool. It's like they both learned from each other.
exactly.
And Schuré says that this meeting really revitalized the Delphic Mysteries.
It did. It gave the priest a renewed sense of purpose, and it restored Delphi's potential as a center of spiritual life.
Wow. So it was like a win-win for everyone involved.
Yeah, it was a beautiful example of how knowledge and inspiration can be passed down through the ages.
And how ancient wisdom can still be relevant today.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into the mysteries of Pythagoras and the Delphic Oracle.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
It really has. And it's amazing to think about how all these threads come together.
Yeah, from Pythagoras' incredible journey through Egypt and Babylon to his transformative encounter with Theoclea at Delphi.
And how his teachings helped to shape the course of Western thought.
Exactly. He was a true pioneer in so many ways.
He really was. And, it makes you wonder what other ancient sites or figures might hold similar stories of hidden knowledge.
Yeah, and how exploring those stories might shed light on our own search for meaning and truth in the modern world.
Absolutely. If you're interested in learning more about Pythagoras and the Delphic Oracle, I highly encourage you to do your own research.
There's so much out there to discover.
There really is.
And who knows, you might even uncover some hidden truths of your own.
On that note, I think we'll say goodbye for now, but be sure to join us next time as we continue our exploration into the fascinating world of occult archives.
Until then.
Keep seeking.